A picture-perfect lie, the Hart family tragedy. The illusion of peace and perfection. Tucked away in the quiet, picturesque landscape of Woodland, Washington, lies a neighborhood that could be the setting for an ideal American dream. The area is serene, with tall evergreens lining the streets, a backdrop of mountains framing the horizon, and the gentle hum of life moving slowly. The houses here are spread apart, with expansive backyards that offer plenty of privacy. Woodland's charm comes from its simplicity. People move here to escape the hustle of city life, to find peace in nature, and to raise their families in a safe, welcoming environment. On any given day, you might see families taking leisurely strolls down tree-lined roads, children playing in yards, and neighbors exchanging pleasantries over white picket fences. It's a place where everyone seems to know each other, where people feel secure leaving their doors unlocked at night, and where life appears calm, almost idyllic. Woodland's quiet streets and small-town charm make it the perfect place to settle down, raise children, and build a life away from the chaos of the world. The Hart family, who lived at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, seemed to embody this ideal. Their home, nestled in nature, stood as a testament to the kind of life so many people seek. Jennifer and Sarah Hart, the proud parents of 6 adopted children, had found refuge in this peaceful neighborhood, far removed from the noise of the city. Their house, surrounded by lush greenery, gave off the appearance of safety and serenity. But beneath the surface, behind those closed doors, something far more sinister was unfolding, a reality that sharply contrasted with the calm beauty of the neighborhood. The same peace and isolation that had made this place so appealing would soon become a cloak for something dark, something hidden. As the town of Woodland went about its daily routines, oblivious to the tragedy that was brewing, the Hart children were trapped in a living nightmare. The setting is almost ironic, like something out of a storybook. The pristine nature, the calm of a rural town, and the illusion of a perfect family created a stark contrast to the horrors happening just out of view. As neighbors waved and smiled at the Harts during their rare appearances in public, they couldn't have imagined the fear and pain that lay beneath the surface of those children's forced smiles. The tranquility of Woodland was about to be shattered. What was once a symbol of peace and family unity would soon become the site of unimaginable tragedy. The Hart family, who had seemed to embody everything beautiful about life in this quiet corner of Washington, would soon be revealed as a family teetering on the edge of a dark and terrible secret. Little did the community know that the same trees that surrounded the Hart home would witness the last days of the children's lives. The towering evergreens standing as silent sentinels to the suffering inside. The illusion of the perfect family. The Hart family, at first glance, seemed like a modern embodiment of love, diversity, and compassion. 2 progressive mothers, Jennifer and Sarah Hart, had adopted 6 children: Marcus, Hannah, Devontae, Abigail, Jeremiah, and Sierra, from troubled backgrounds, and, through Jennifer's carefully curated social media presence, they portrayed a family that had overcome adversity. In Jennifer's Facebook posts, their life appeared to be full of adventure, social justice activism, and boundless love. The family was regularly seen attending protests, traveling across the country, and engaging in community activism, with Jennifer sharing photos of their picturesque road trips, bonding moments, and family life filled with seemingly joyful, smiling children. Jennifer was a master at crafting an image of a loving, supportive family, making sure to highlight how much the children were growing and thriving in their care. She often posted photos of the children at scenic locations, on beaches, hiking trails, or gathered around campfires, with captions filled with uplifting, heartwarming messages. Devontae Hart, in particular, became a symbol of racial unity after a photo of him tearfully hugging a police officer at a 2014 protest in Portland, Oregon went viral. In that moment, Devontae represented the kind of hope and reconciliation that Jennifer worked tirelessly to portray online. But behind the carefully staged photos and inspirational posts, the reality was much darker. The Hart children, who had all come from backgrounds of trauma and instability, were subjected to ongoing abuse and control. Jennifer and Sarah's outward activism, advocating for racial justice, promoting kindness, and attending rallies, stood in sharp contrast to the way they treated their children behind closed doors. While Jennifer portrayed herself as a devoted, hands-on mother, the truth was that she exerted an oppressive and stifling control over the children. Reports later revealed that the children were denied food, isolated from others, and subjected to harsh punishments for minor infractions. The children themselves had unique personalities, but they were rarely allowed to show them. Marcus, the eldest, was described by those who knew him as quiet and thoughtful, but he was often reserved around strangers, possibly as a result of the harsh discipline at home. Hannah, the second oldest, had once jumped from a second-story window in a desperate attempt to flee the household, running to neighbors for help before being dragged back by Jennifer. Her act of defiance was a rare glimpse into the terror that lurked behind the facade. Devontae, whose outward image of kindness became iconic after the viral photo, was described by friends and acquaintances as bright and empathetic, but his outgoing personality masked deeper issues. Behind the scenes, he had been seen begging neighbors for food, claiming that his mothers withheld it from him and his siblings as a form of punishment. The desperation in his pleas for help would later haunt those who had interacted with him. The younger children, Abigail, Jeremiah, and Sierra, were similarly controlled and isolated. They were often homeschooled, kept away from peers, and rarely allowed to interact freely with other children. To outsiders, they seemed obedient, but as more details emerged, it became clear that their silence was a result of fear and manipulation. Jennifer and Sarah ruled the household with an iron grip, hiding the children from anyone who might uncover the truth. Despite living in several states, Minnesota, Oregon, and finally Washington, wherever they went, whispers of abuse followed. Neighbors, acquaintances, and even teachers had occasionally noticed bruises on the children or observed their extreme fearfulness, but nothing concrete was ever done. Social services had been alerted on more than one occasion, but Jennifer and Sarah were skilled at evading scrutiny, moving their family whenever authorities got too close. As the cracks in the family's perfect facade grew more visible, it became harder for Jennifer and Sarah to maintain control. The children's cries for help became more frequent, with neighbors reporting that they had seen Devontae and the other children begging for food or expressing fear of their mothers. But no one realized the extent of the situation until it was too late. The Hart family story serves as a chilling reminder that what we see on social media is often just a carefully curated version of reality. Behind the smiling photos and perfect captions, the Hart children were living in a nightmare that ended in tragedy, leaving many to wonder how the system had failed them so profoundly. The contrast between the family's public persona and their private horrors continues to haunt those who knew them, offering a sobering lesson about the dangers of hiding behind a facade. The first cracks in the facade, reports of abuse. The public saw the Harts as the perfect example of modern progressive parenting, but teachers, neighbors, and even child protective services began noticing red flags. As early as 2008, reports of abuse started to surface. Early signs in Minnesota. Shortly after adopting their first 3 children, Jennifer and Sarah faced allegations of child neglect. The children were reportedly showing up to school with bruises and complaining of hunger. Teachers reported that the children seemed terrified of their mothers, but these warnings went largely unheeded. Physical punishment. Teachers noticed that the children, especially Hannah, were often bruised or appeared fearful. When questioned, the children were vague and reluctant to speak about their home life. Eventually, in 2010, Sarah Hart admitted to a CPS investigator that she had spanked one of the children in a manner that was deemed excessive. She pled guilty to domestic assault and was given a 1-year probationary sentence. However, the family was allowed to keep custody of the children. This was a critical turning point. Instead of removing the children from the Harts' care, authorities allowed them to relocate to Oregon. This pattern of relocation would repeat itself, as the Harts seemed to slip through the cracks of the system that was supposed to protect their children. Isolation and control. The life of the Hart children. As the years went on, the Hart family became increasingly isolated. Jennifer and Sarah pulled the children out of school and began homeschooling them. This effectively cut off the children from any outside influences, making it harder for them to report the abuse they were enduring. They became entirely dependent on their mothers, especially Jennifer, who tightly controlled every aspect of their lives. Neighbors began noticing disturbing behavior, hunger and food control. The children were often seen sneaking over to neighbors' houses, asking for food. Despite Jennifer's frequent posts about the organic, healthy meals she was feeding the children, it was clear that the kids were being deprived of food. One neighbor recalled a particularly disturbing incident in which Hannah Hart climbed out of her second-story window in the middle of the night, barefoot, and begged for help, saying that she was being abused. Strange behavior. Friends and neighbors noted that the children always seemed unnaturally quiet and obedient, as though they had been coached on what to say and how to act in public. They were not allowed to speak for themselves or express any kind of independent thought. At public events, Jennifer would often speak for the children, insisting that they were happy and thriving. Any suggestion otherwise was swiftly shut down. It was clear to those who saw the family up close that something was terribly wrong, but Jennifer's carefully curated social media presence shielded the family from deeper scrutiny. The online world saw only a happy, loving family, while in reality, the children were living in fear. The final days, desperation sets in. In March 2018, after years of suspicions and warning signs, Child Protective Services was finally closing in on the Hart family. The final tipping point came when a neighbor, already alarmed by previous troubling interactions with the children, witnessed something deeply disturbing. Devonte Hart, the boy who had once become a symbol of hope in a viral photo, was seen begging for food. The neighbor reported that Devonte had come to their house multiple times asking for food, claiming that his mothers were withholding meals from him and his siblings as punishment. This was the final red flag, and CPS decided to take action. After receiving the report from the concerned neighbor, CPS scheduled a visit to the Hart home in Woodland, Washington. This wasn't the first time authorities had been alerted to possible abuse within the household, but previous investigations had not resulted in any decisive actions. Jennifer and Sarah were skilled at keeping up appearances, managing to evade serious scrutiny by moving frequently and controlling the narrative around their family. But this time felt different. There was a sense that the authorities were closing in. For Jennifer Hart, the family's dominant figure and the architect of their public image, the CPS Visit represented an existential threat. For years, Jennifer had meticulously curated an image of her family as loving, progressive, and socially conscious. Her social media posts painted a picture of joy and unity, filled with smiling photos of their adventures and activism. But the truth, hidden behind the walls of their home, was much darker. If CPS uncovered the reality of the abuse and neglect, it would not only mean the removal of her children, but also the collapse of the perfect image she had worked so hard to maintain. Jennifer's need for control was central to how the family operated. She dictated how the children behaved in public, controlled what they said, and even regulated how much food they ate. The children were always under her watchful eye, and any deviation from her rules was met with harsh punishment. As CPS planned their visit, Jennifer's fear of losing that control escalated. The threat of having the family dynamic exposed, to lose her children and her narrative, became too much for her to handle. In the days leading up to the scheduled visit, Jennifer made a fateful decision. She and Sarah packed up the children into their SUV and left their home, fleeing down the West Coast in a desperate attempt to outrun the inevitable confrontation with CPS. To outsiders, it might have seemed like the family was going on one of their typical road trips, but this journey was different. This time, Jennifer wasn't just escaping physical scrutiny. She was trying to preserve the fragile facade she had built, a facade that was crumbling rapidly under the weight of their hidden abuse. For the 6 children, the decision to pack up and leave must have been deeply unsettling. By this point, they were no strangers to instability. The family had moved numerous times before, often under the guise of starting a new chapter, but this time there was a palpable tension in the air. The children, already conditioned to fear their mother's anger, likely sensed that something was wrong. The hurried packing, the sense of dread hanging over the family, and the anxious demeanor of their mothers would have made the children feel even more on edge. Jennifer's increasing desperation became more evident as the family drove further south. With each passing mile, the walls seemed to close in on her, and her fear of losing control of the situation deepened. The thought of CPS stepping in and taking the children, exposing the abuse, was something Jennifer could not bear. In her mind, the only way to protect herself and maintain her narrative was to end it all. The murder-suicide, the Cliffside Tragedy. On March 26, 2018, the nightmare that had been slowly building within the Hart family reached its grim conclusion. That morning, Jennifer Hart steered the family's SUV onto the scenic Pacific Coast Highway in Mendocino County, California. This stretch of road is known for its breathtaking views, with cliffs plunging into the Pacific Ocean below. But for Jennifer, it wasn't the beauty that drew her here. It was the final, irreversible act that would end her family's lives. As the SUV traveled closer to the cliff's edge, the children, Marcus, Hannah, Devonte, Abigail, Jeremiah, and Sierra, could not have known the true horror that awaited them. Trapped in the vehicle, they had no control over what was about to happen. In those final moments, they were likely confused, frightened, perhaps even hopeful that this was just another one of their family's spontaneous road trips. But the tension in the air was unmistakable. Jennifer had made up her mind. At some point during the drive, Jennifer's thoughts must have been racing, but her decision was chillingly clear. There were no second thoughts, no moments of hesitation. The SUV, carrying her wife Sarah and their 6 adopted children, sped toward the cliff's edge. Investigators would later note that there were no skid marks, no evidence that Jennifer had tried to stop the vehicle or change course. In an act that can only be described as deliberate, she drove straight off the cliff, sending the car plunging more than 100 feet down to the rocky shoreline below. The wreckage was discovered soon after. The sight that awaited first responders was one of absolute devastation. The once pristine SUV, now mangled beyond recognition, lay shattered on the jagged rocks. Debris from the vehicle was strewn across the shoreline, and the sound of the waves crashing against the cliff only added to the eerie quiet that had descended upon the scene. Inside the SUV, Jennifer, Sarah, and their 6 children were all found dead. The children, strapped into their seats, had been robbed of any chance to escape, any opportunity to resist what was coming. They were victims of a calculated murder-suicide, their lives stolen by the very person who was supposed to protect them. For the investigators, it quickly became clear that this was no accident. Jennifer had been drinking heavily before the crash. Toxicology reports revealed that she had a high level of alcohol in her system at the time of the incident, enough to impair her judgment, though it seemed she had already decided the family's fate long before that final drink. Sarah, Jennifer's wife, was also found to have been sedated. An over-the-counter antihistamine was present in her system, suggesting that she had been drugged, possibly to prevent her from resisting Jennifer's final deadly decision. But the most chilling realization for the authorities was the utter lack of control the children had in their final moments. They had been silenced, their fates decided by the very person who had promised to give them a better life. Jennifer's need for control, her desire to maintain the facade of a perfect family, had culminated in this horrific act. In those final moments, the children, who had already endured years of abuse and neglect, were once again powerless, unable to fight back, unable to escape, The SUV became their tomb. First responders worked quickly to recover the bodies from the wreckage, but the emotional weight of the scene was inescapable. The remains of Marcus, Hannah, Devonte, Abigail, Jeremiah, and Sierra were found among the wreckage, still strapped into their seats. Investigators could only imagine the terror and confusion they must have felt in those final moments. These children, who had already been through so much, were denied even the possibility of survival. For the authorities, the scene was haunting. The Pacific Ocean, usually a place of beauty and peace, had become the site of an unthinkable tragedy. The waves continued to crash against the rocks as investigators pieced together the events that had led to this senseless loss of life. In the end, it was clear that Jennifer Hart had taken all control away from her children. She had silenced them forever, ensuring that her secret would die with them. This act of ultimate betrayal, a mother's deliberate choice to end the lives of her children, left a deep and lingering scar, not only on the immediate community, but on all who heard the story. These were children who had come from troubled backgrounds, children who had already suffered so much, only to be met with something even worse, an escape from one nightmare, only to be delivered into another, much darker fate. In the aftermath of the crash, as details of the abuse surfaced, it became painfully clear that the public persona Jennifer had so carefully crafted was nothing more than a facade. The Hart children had lived their lives trapped in an image of a perfect family, while behind closed doors, they were subjected to systemic abuse. And when that facade began to crack, Jennifer took the most extreme measure imaginable to ensure that the truth would never come to light. The aftermath, a community in shock. The news of the Hart family tragedy shocked the nation, but it hit the hardest in the small communities that had known them. In Woodland, Washington, where the family had most recently lived, neighbors were left reeling from the horrifying revelation. How could this have happened right under their noses? Why had none of their warnings been enough to save the children? As the details of the murder-suicide emerged, people began to question the role of Child Protective Services, the neighbors, and even friends who had previously suspected abuse. There had been multiple reports of neglect and abuse filed over the years, yet each time the Harts managed to escape scrutiny. The fact that Jennifer and Sarah had moved the family across state lines multiple times made it easier for them to avoid deeper investigations. And with Jennifer's ability to present a perfectly curated life online, it was easy to dismiss any concerns as overblown or misinterpreted. For the community, the tragedy represented more than just the loss of 8 lives. It was a stark reminder of how easily vulnerable children can fall through the cracks of the system. People who had known the family expressed their disbelief that such horrific abuse had been happening in plain sight, with no one able to stop it. The investigation, unraveling the deception. As investigators delved deeper into the events leading up to the Hart family tragedy, a disturbing pattern of control, manipulation, and abuse began to emerge. Interviews with former friends, teachers, and neighbors revealed that behind the carefully curated social media persona, Jennifer Hart was a deeply controlling and narcissistic figure. She meticulously managed every aspect of the family's life, especially the children's interactions with the outside world. Jennifer and her wife Sarah had adopted 6 children, each from troubled backgrounds, and initially appeared to be giving them a second chance at life. However, investigators quickly uncovered that this appearance was nothing more than a facade. Jennifer, in particular, was the dominant force in the household, and she used her control to isolate the children from any outside influences. The children were homeschooled, which allowed Jennifer to shield them from any authorities, teachers, or adults who might have noticed signs of abuse. The few times the children interacted with others outside the family, they were coached on what to say and how to behave, often forced to present an image of happiness and obedience. Physical punishment was also a part of the family's routine. If the children stepped out of line or failed to follow Jennifer's strict rules, they were subjected to harsh discipline. The children had learned to fear their mother and any sign of rebellion was quickly squashed. Sarah Hart, Jennifer's wife, was often seen as a more passive figure, going along with Jennifer's methods and not intervening, even when the punishments became extreme. The investigation also revealed that the Child Protective Services had launched multiple investigations into the family over the years, including complaints filed by people who had observed the children begging for food or showing signs of distress. In the months leading up to the fatal crash, CPS had begun yet another investigation, and this time, the situation appeared dire. The authorities were closing in, and Jennifer likely realized that the truth was about to come to light. The mounting pressure of the investigation, combined with the fear of losing control over her carefully constructed image, may have driven Jennifer to make the unthinkable decision to take her family's lives rather than face the consequences. What investigators uncovered about the Hart family painted a tragic and horrifying picture. The once inspirational story of two women rescuing 6 children from difficult beginnings had crumbled into a narrative of abuse, control, and systemic failure. It became clear that Jennifer's need for control, both over her family and the narrative of their lives, was the driving force behind the tragic events that culminated in the murder-suicide. The investigation exposed not just the depth of Jennifer's manipulation, but also the missed opportunities by authorities to intervene and save the children. Systemic failures: how the system failed the Hart children. As the investigation continued, it became clear that the system had failed the Hart children at nearly every turn. Multiple CPS reports had been filed over the years, detailing concerns about the children's welfare, their constant hunger, and their frequent bruises. But every time, Jennifer and Sarah managed to deflect these concerns, presenting themselves as doting, loving parents who were simply misunderstood. One of the most damning failures came just days before the murder-suicide. A neighbor had contacted CPS after one of the children, Devonte, had repeatedly asked for food, telling the neighbor that he and his siblings were being starved at home. CPS attempted to follow up on the report, but by the time they arrived at the Hart residence, the family had already fled. It was too late to intervene. This failure was compounded by a lack of coordination between state agencies. Because the Harts had moved from state to state, each new set of authorities had incomplete information about their history of abuse. Had there been better communication between states and more aggressive follow-ups on CPS reports, the tragedy might have been prevented. The case sparked a nationwide conversation about the effectiveness of the child welfare system, particularly in cases involving adopted children. Many questioned how 2 women with a documented history of abuse were allowed to retain custody of 6 vulnerable children for so long. The legacy? Lessons learned from the Hart family tragedy. The Hart family tragedy remains a painful reminder of how appearances can be deceiving and how deeply people can hide their dark realities. It also raises important questions about the role of social media in shaping perceptions. Jennifer Hart's carefully curated online persona masked years of abuse, creating an illusion of a loving, progressive family that was admired by many. But behind the filtered photos and heartwarming posts, there was a family in crisis, and tragically, no one was able to see the full picture until it was too late. For many, the case also underscored the importance of vigilance in child protection. While systems like CPS exist to protect vulnerable children, the case highlighted glaring gaps in how those systems function, especially when it comes to interstate coordination and follow-up on serious allegations. The Hart family's story is a haunting reminder that even in a world where we are constantly connected, it's easy to miss the signs of real danger. The children who once seemed to have been given a second chance at life were ultimately betrayed by the very people meant to protect them. A family's final fate. The deaths of the Hart children serve as a stark reminder of how easily lives can be destroyed when abuse goes unchecked. The 6 children, who had already experienced difficult beginnings, were subjected to years of emotional and physical torment under the guise of love and care. In the end, they were robbed of their futures by the very people who were supposed to protect them. This tragedy, hidden behind a facade of perfection, forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that sometimes the people we trust the most to protect and care for the vulnerable are the ones who are capable of causing the greatest harm. The Hart family tragedy is not just a story of one family's collapse. It's a broader cautionary tale about the power of deception, the failures of the system, and the importance of vigilance when it comes to protecting those who cannot protect themselves.